Hi, Rama. It's week 22, day 5 of our Bible narrative reading plan. Today we're in 2 Samuel chapter 19. We saw yesterday the death of Absalom, and we saw at the end of the chapter David's great grief and mourning. And we pick right back up there in chapter 19, and we see that David is continuing to mourn, and so much so that it's having an effect not just on David, but on the nation as a whole, the people, the soldiers. Joab hears about David's mourning, and Joab confronts him. You see that the people in chapter 3, the soldiers, they come back into the city not victorious, even though they were victorious in battle, but they come back as if they were defeated. They steal away into the city, as the text says, because of the king's mourning. They are now downcast because of the king's response. It seems that the king values his rebellious son over their valor in battle. And verse 4 tells us that the king, David, he's continuing to cover his face. He's crying aloud. He's inconsolable for Absalom. But Joab, the general of his army, Joab shows up. And Joab confronts David. And as we've seen with Joab's character throughout the book, Joab acts like Joab, and he's very much in David's face, and he says, look, you are being a disgrace to your men. If you don't change this much longer, if you don't thank them for what they've done in battle, they are going to desert you. You are not treating them well at all. And so David hears from Joab, and we see his response is that he recognizes this, and he begins acting like a king again. He goes and he sits in the city gate, which is showing that kingly authority. The last time he was there, he was watching them as they went off into battle. And so now he is resuming his position of authority at the city gate, and he's thanking the soldiers for what they have done. And now the nation begins to unite around David as king. Remember that the nation was very much divided. As Absalom tried to steal the throne, some tribes of the nation did go with him. And we see here that there are lots of seeds of division between the northern tribes and the southern tribes. And we know, if you've read your Old Testament, you know this is going to become important, that we see here already the roots of what's going to come ultimately in the division between the northern tribes and the southern tribes. Then the last half of the chapter also emphasizes David dealing with enemies and also dealing with people who have blessed him. And so Shimei, the man that we saw earlier in the book, he is the one who cursed David, and David was very patient and kind in dealing with Shimei at that time, saying, well, perhaps he's right, perhaps the Lord has sent him to do this. Shimei acknowledges his sin, his curse towards David, and even though Abishai and others want to kill Shimei, David says, no, we're going to show him grace, we're going to let him live. Now, we realize that this is temporary because we're going to see later on that Shimei is going to come up in the story again later on. But we see David being gracious to those who were his enemies. He's also blessing people who could have been seen as enemies. So we see Mephibosheth, again, the grandson of Saul, here referred to as the son of Saul, showing that he, even though he's actually Jonathan's son, he is the rightful heir of Saul's family. And earlier in the book, there was lies, there was confusion about what was going on with the descendants of Saul during this time of rebellion from Absalom, and as David had to flee for his life. But now Mephibosheth is speaking to David and says, look, here's what happens. And you notice in the text that David doesn't really dig in to see who's right and who's wrong. He actually just divides the land between Mephibosheth and the other heir, Ziba. But we see the character of Mephibosheth because he's just thankful that God's right king, the anointed one, is still alive. He's not worried about the land. And then you see there at the end that David is also blessing Barzillai, the Gileadite, the one who had also served him and helped him while David was in a time of need. So we look at all this and we see David, again, being the king of God's own choosing, not a perfect king, but the king after God's own heart. But then when we also read in Psalm chapter 24, a wonderful psalm pointing us to the true king, the one and only, the King of glory, Jesus Christ. And so I trust that these verses are an encouragement to you today. Here's a summary of today's reading. For more information, go to tunemyheart.org.